observation that virtually everything he sees, when it freezes, it gets bigger. And that's generally true. When liquid freezes, it expands. But then he wonders in particular about water. He thinks, I wonder when water freezes, does it expand? Well, he doesn't even have to go and try anything. He doesn't have to freeze some water and measure it to find out. He can figure that out in his mind. You think about it. If water got smaller when it froze, that would mean it's denser. It's the same amount of material taking up less space. It's denser, which would mean that if ice shrinks as it freezes, then ice should sink. So that if ice forms on the river, it should sink to the bottom. If I have a piece of ice, I throw it in a glass, it should sink to the bottom if water shrinks when it freezes. But what do we know? Every piece of ice you ever saw was floating in the water. Well, it must be that water expands when it freezes. It's one of the few things that does. But you don't have to do some lab work to figure that out. You can steer through that in your mind. So it was in a similar spirit 17 centuries ago that one Christian got himself sent into exile for thinking about it, but it's still around. It's still called the Arian syllogism, where Arius said, well, suppose that there was a man who was God at the same time as he was man. He's God and he's man. He's not man now and God then or whatever. He is God, he is man all at the same time. Suppose that's true. But now suppose I met a man like that and I stabbed him with a knife. What happens? Does he die or does he live? If he's God, he should live. If he's a man, he should die. He can't do both. So as Arius put it, if he died, he wasn't God. If he was God, he didn't die. See, in all generosity, the Muslim can come that far, even on that subject. Say to the Christian, if you want to tell me Jesus was God, go ahead, but don't tell me he died. If you want to tell me he died, go ahead, but don't tell me he was God. I'll give you one, but you can't have both, because it doesn't mean anything. God doesn't die. I know that sometimes people try and take this apart, but Al-Ghazali talked about it 900 years ago. They'll tell you, well, this man we're talking about, he was God and man like a sandwich, you see. I mean, he's God and man all mixed together, and when he was killed, you see, the man part died, the God part lived. Well, that's an interesting idea, but then it means the God-man didn't die. See, if I tell you, today I ate a sandwich for lunch, except for the bread, did I eat a sandwich for lunch? I had a piece of cheese, or whatever was on the inside. What happens to the sandwich happens to the bread. What happens to the sandwich happens to everything in it, or you didn't really eat a sandwich. If you say, we killed the God-man, but what you mean is, well, we killed the man part, and the God got away, then you didn't kill the God-man. Killed the man. Which according to the most beliefs is not enough. If a man dies, it doesn't help us. We need the God-man to die, but we take it apart anyway at that time. And if you take him apart at the last moment in his life, it just reminds you you had a problem the day before that too. If he was God and man the day before that, tell me, did he know everything or did he just know some things? If he knows everything, he's not a man. That's not a man. Who knows everything is not a man. Who does not know everything is not God. So what about Jesus? Were there things he knew or things he didn't know? Did he know all things or only some things? You have to take him apart again. That's why a few hundred years ago, Spinoza was a Jew who had investigated philosophy and earned quite a reputation, and he pretty well separated himself from the Jewish community. And there were a lot of people who came to him and said, well, you've had the good sense not to be a Jew, you ought to be a Christian. And he said, I might, if I knew what you're talking about. He says, you tell me God became a man. If I hear the words, but I don't know what it means. Can you tell me what it means? You can always put words together in a string, but what do they mean? Spinoza said, do you mean he used to be God and then he turned into a man? Is that what you mean? God became man? Do you mean whatever God is made of, it was all squeezed together and made into the shape of a man? Is that what you mean? Like when you say that water is made out of water molecules, they're in a vapor, but you squeeze them together, you get a liquid? Is that what you mean? What do you mean when you say that? Because usually when you say this became that, you mean it's not what it used to be anymore. If I have a ball of clay and I shape it into a cube, I'll tell you, see, the ball became a cube. But I can't tell you it's still round. I know it has corners, but it's still round. No, it used to be round. Now it has corners. This became that. When you say God became man, you mean he's not God anymore. He used to be. If you mean he's a man and he's still God, then you have these problems of saying, well, then what is he? Is he mortal or immortal? Can you kill him or not? I know that there's no end to comparisons that people try to make on this, and the Church of England tried to put the brakes on that 300 years ago. They tried to stop this kind of thing. About 300 years ago, the Unitarians were causing such a fuss in England that it got to be that every Sunday the sermon was the Trinity, and someone would say, well, it's like this. You see, it's like when you have a clover and you have 3 leaves and 1 stem. Somebody else say, oh, it's like an egg. You have a shell and a white and a yolk, and so on. Every priest had a different idea. Finally, the Church of England issued orders and stop talking about it. You're making it worse. There's nothing like the Trinity. There's nothing you can point to and say it's like that. There's nothing that exists like that. No place. There's nothing where you have 3 items and each one is the whole thing. Some people will say, well, look at the triple point of water. Come back to water again. Under certain conditions of temperature and pressure, you can have water in a container, and some of it will be ice, some of it will be gas, and some of it will be liquid. So they say, you see, at the triple point, there's these 3 different forms, they coexist. Well, yes, they do. Some of that is ice, and some of it is water, some of it is vapor. But you can't point to any one molecule and say, this molecule here, it's liquid and it's solid at the same time. See, that's the point. It's a false analogy like hundreds of others. It's either that or, if people would insist that somehow it's still possible that 2 opposite things can both be true, then I wonder why they worry about the Muslims. They ought to be happy enough to say to the Muslim, it's true that Jesus is God, and it's true that he isn't. We're both right. Makes as much sense. This claim and its denial should be able to coexist side by side. If everything else like that, if you say, this one was immortal, you couldn't kill him. Ah, but you could kill him. Well, if those 2 opposite things can both be true, so can these. A statement that says he's this, and the one that says, no, he isn't, they're both right. It makes as much sense. As one man said to me one time after a discussion of some of these items of information, he stood up in the question period and he said, you're absolutely right. He said, it's impossible to believe the things that I believe. He said, unless you have the gift of faith from God, then you can believe it. If God gives you the gift, you can believe it. So, as the meeting was breaking up, he came around close to me again, and I asked him, how do I get the gift of faith from God? He said, there's only one way to get it. First, you have to believe all these things. Now, can you think about that? Saying you can't believe them until you get the gift. And when you say, how do I get the gift? Says you won't get it till you believe them. See, there's no belief without belief. That's like telling a man, you want to quit smoking? Look, it's easy. First thing you do is you don't smoke. Now, after that, it's easy. The requirement can't be the same as the goal. Now, of course, I also realize it's a familiar charge that people will say, the problem with you Muslims is you reject what you don't understand. That's not true. That's not what's happening. The Muslim says, well, I can't understand that, so it must be false. That's not what the Muslim is supposed to be doing. People are confusing 2 different ideas here. Come back to water again. They say water is made of a molecule of water is made of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 of oxygen. You mix hydrogen and oxygen, 2 gases together, you get water. I don't know how it works. See, I don't think anybody really knows how. Nobody's quite sure yet what an atom is. They don't know how it works, but they know it works.